Welcome. Hi, everybody. I'm glad you're here. I'm Cindy Zulsdorf, and welcome to a leader seminar. This is an interview with Alix Milan, how a DIT quickly and accurately monitors color on set. And Alix, I just got to meet him. He's brilliant. He's a digital imaging technician and managing director of We Love Hue Limited, on-set color and workflow specialists. And so if you want the inside scoop about how his work is done, how the work of a DIT is done, colorists, how they contribute to everything, you got to stay with us today. And you're going to find out what achieves the fastest visual representation of luminance values within a scene, how Alix matches angles quickly, and so much more. So welcome. Over to you, Kevin.
Brilliant. Thank you, Cindy. And Alix, thank you for joining us. And Steve. We've hitched up the wagon. We're rolling again.
We most certainly have, Kevin. I'm glad to be here. I always enjoy doing these with you.
Yeah. So for those of you not been with us before, this is actually the third kind of in a series of interviews we've done, and the previous two are available for viewing on Catch Up. And if you can't stay with the duration today, this one will be posted on our YouTube channels as well, as soon as the editor, which is me, can get it all done. So great. So as I said, we can take questions through the chat. We'll pull them up and answer them at the end. But at this point, rather than me talk, what I'd like to do is pass it over to Alix. And Alix, firstly, thank you for joining us. And do you want to give a quick introduction to yourself, what you do, and what projects you've worked on that I'm sure our audience are keen to know about?
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking me. Thank you very much to Cindy as well for that beautiful introduction. Yeah, I'm Alix Milan. I run a company called We Love Hue. We're based in the UK, specifically London, and I came from a post background. I used to be in the MCR room assisting in a VFX and colour house. And then I decided to move out onto set and started as a data manager and sort of shadowed a DIT, and gradually over the course of the last 10 years have built a DIT video playback agency, and we supply kit to commercial and drama projects throughout the UK. So yeah, that's me. I'm still on set. I still do commercials and long form occasionally, but we also manage like a dailies pipeline for larger projects, and I'm sort of moving maybe to more in that direction to look after that sort of stuff and move a little bit offset sometimes, and yeah, I'm having a great time.
Excellent. Do you want to name drop some productions that you've worked on?
Yeah, sure. Recently we've worked on something called Supacell, which Aaron Reed shot from August last year up until about the end of January. We did season 1 of Bridgerton, and our HDR show, most recent HDR show was one called I Came By, which was shot by Kit Frazier, and that was a Netflix production.
Excellent. So I think you may have partly answered the first question, but for those of you who've seen the other, we asked Dane, who is a DIT based in the US, what is a DIT? And I think it'd be interesting to hear from your perspective, because lots of people say that what goes on in the US is slightly different to what happens in the UK and Europe.
Sure, yeah. My sort of response to that would be that, I mean, when Dane sort of actually sort of said my explanation to my mother and her friends, and I quite like that. So I usually call myself a color technician, a camera technician with a color consultancy twist to my mum and her friends. But really a DIT is a key player in setting up and overseeing and communicating the overall image pipeline between the set and post-production, VFX, sounds in there, cameras in there. You know, working closely with the cinematographer, the camera assistants, and the gaffers. We're subject matter experts for color and image pipelines, digital cameras, imaging capture, metadata, data management. DITs should be capable of live color correction, exposure checks, live QCing, establishing an accurate and consistent viewing experience is crucial. We provide a second opinion to the DOP. We help to achieve consistency between shots within a scene. Yeah, it's kind of a...
And your day jobs.
Yeah, wow. So Alex, quick question. So before we get into the part about HDR and how it's impacted, we'd like to know how it's impacted your day-to-day operation on set. How have things changed in your preparation when it gets to an HDR shoot?
One thing to sort of keep in mind is that it's important to remember that we're already shooting in HDR. We are already sort of capturing images that are capable of being manipulated in that way. What's different now, I guess, is the display technology and helping people to understand that your typical SDR monitor is only going to be about 7 or 8 stops, and that's kind of what they're used to. I guess people don't get that sometimes, and so I guess understanding that is probably the first step. So yeah, I mean, all that really changes to a degree is how we view the image, and that starts with the monitors on set and their ability to display that greater bucket of data that we can now gather. Ultimately, I guess due to the nature of this being a new experience for a lot of people, the most important thing, or one of the most important things to remember, is that this is display related. As such, people should just take that into consideration. Rec 2020 and these new wider gamuts that are available are ultimately just a bucket for you to fill up with your data, and the display that you choose needs to be able to match that final output. So a little research or understanding of the deliverables is going to help you inform your monitor requirements. One of the things that I encourage people to do when prepping for HDR is to actually get a HDR monitor. I mean, it makes a big difference, and the sooner that you get it, the quicker you will begin to understand the difference. When I went to BSc a few years ago and saw HDR for the first time, I was really impressed with the way that, although it's familiar, it's tangibly different in a few key areas that really allows you to be more subtle in a lot of ways with your creativity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks. We appreciate that.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I mean, obviously, most of us understand, like, we've seen the kind of deliverable side of this. It's up to 1,000 nits. Yet, talking to quite a few people, they're saying, actually, I'm using HDR quite sparingly. I'm using it for impact. I'm using it for subtlety. Is that something that you would agree with?
Yes. I mean, I guess it's important to understand that we don't need to reinvent the wheel in terms of when it comes to lighting for HDR, because it's not a case of multiplying a 100 nit scene by 10 to get things to 1,000 nits. It's not, you're not, it's really just about comparing two different size buckets. So 0 to 100 nits for SDR, 1,000 nits for HDR, Netflix standard. The first 100 nits is usually going to stay in the same place. Even, HDR is not really going to affect much of that first 100 nits. More common, or commonly, sorry, we are still lighting the bulk of the scene to 100 nits or thereabouts, and then allowing our highlights to expand when we deem it necessary. And obviously, understanding the script and the scene is, of course, such an important requirement for making decisions on lighting, in the same way that understanding the script is important for the overall visual style, the costume, the set. It informs us, it infers so much for the context, and the way that we utilize lighting is always just as a way, it's to aid the journey that the viewer is being taken on. The cinematographer is utilizing so many skills to make that journey the most engaging interpretation that it can be. So making sure that we can advise correctly on how this is all taking place is key. And obviously having the ability to refer back to a leader is really useful. It tells you what is what. It doesn't really lie to you in the same way that your eyes will. So, as we all know, the human eye is constantly rebalancing the world around us, and what we perceive to be white on a day-to-day basis is inherently dependent on where you are and what kind of lighting you're under and all that kind of stuff. Whereas having a scope that isn't location dependent in that same way is the only way to reliably light a scene. Really, that's the real value of a set of scopes like that, because when you get down to the minute details of the color profile of a light, and being able to specifically pick out, okay, that particular light there has a half stop more red, or has a half stop more in the red channel, should I say, than that other light, which is also lighting the same face. And they're supposed to be the same. The lighting technician is telling you they're both at 100 or they're both at 65, and they're both displaying white, but you can see that clearly one is warmer than the other, and you can tell them to pull it down by a certain amount. Is the difference between getting a job with that DP again or not sometimes.
That sounds, yeah. So you sort of hinted at just a little bit about some of the gear that you needed on your cart, but for an HDR production, what has changed on what you need on your cart?
Mainly the monitors and the way in which you measure them. A lot of the internal gubbins, I would say, would sort of remain the same. But I specifically utilize the 5333 with a HDR license. and that works for me really nicely. It gives me a really nice visual representation using Cinezone, which I love. My HDR monitor of choice is the Flanders Scientific XM311K. It is a massive beast of a monitor, but it's the clear. When I was testing various options, it was one of the clear winners. I chose it based on the fact that when I was speaking to Kit Frazier about how we wanted to monitor HDR and what the deliverables were for the Netflix guides, that really was the monitor that gave us everything that we needed. It's a dual layer technology panel, so it's kind of got the best of. It's not an OLED, it's an LCD, but it's got a second light modulating layer which is placed in between the backlight and the original LCD layer, and it emulates local dimming by physically blocking or modulating the amount of light that passes through. So you have a more the light modulating panel is controllable. It basically gives you like OLED blacks and better contrast ratios than the single layer LCDs. So that's my my preferred monitor. I use box IOs. I use the Arja light boxes now as well. But really, those three things: the waveform with a HDR function, a proper HDR monitor, and decent light boxes. Actually, I forgot the other crucial element of this would be the wireless system that you use. Like for HDR broadcast, you need a minimum of a 10-bit signal. So your traditional, so there's like older generations of Teradeks, or some of the other ones are not quite there yet. But the new 4Ks, the Teradek 4Ks are pretty tasty, and they're lightweight and easy to port around, and that's kind of what we went. Great. But I mean, HDR is more about color. It's also about contrast and brightness. So you need to sort of deal with them all together for it to be a workable solution. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Part of what you're doing as well is educating at the moment, because I can remember when some of these digital cinema cameras appeared, and obviously they're shooting log depending on the manufacturer. And I was on set and people look at these pictures because they're log and they're completely washed out, and everybody going, is this going to work? I'm going to get a phone call from Post saying that these just look washed out because they were so used to monitoring in 709. Are we, again, it's part of your role at the moment, also kind of educating those on set around you what HDR looks like? And I presume, your big monitor is something that, do you pull people across and say, look, have a look at this. This is what we're trying to do.
I'd say a lot of the education that I actually need to do is with the DOP. And that happens mainly before the shoot begins. During tests, we do as much as we can. The production team do inevitably get a better idea of things and how it functions, but I'd say a lot of the teaching of HDR in terms of understanding it, you learn by doing. So it's like I said, like the seeing is believing. You kind of, as you come up with real world examples of where HDR benefits a scene or reduces the cost, you can kind of pull people in to show them. But yeah, I just want to make sure that both I and the DP are on the same page before we start. shooting, where are we going to put our skin, where are we going to put our sky, where is our sort of like safety for highlights and our cutoff for blacks, what are our rules for the shoot, basically. And that's all, for the most part, worked out before the shoot begins. But yeah, every day's a school day, and you're constantly discovering or learning new things. And if it's like a new camera to market and it's been untested, the Alexa 35 certainly caught a lot of people out, in terms of you know, certain elements of their new color science and stuff. A lot of people sort of working out, oh, how to do this or how to do that, whatever. But you know, we were one of the first major UK TV dramas to use the Alexa 35, and like I said, Aaron Reed and I were we weren't shooting HDR on that, but we did spend a lot of time playing with our highlights and shadows to find that sweet spot in the middle. And Aaron likes to sit his black skin tones quite low and like everything quite dark, and so finding that edge and making sure that we hit that but we didn't go over it was, you know, a large portion of the job. And we had tons of night work, and we had loads and loads of, you know, really low key scenes which relied heavily on us not going too far but going far enough to achieve the ambitious look that Aaron was going for. And we didn't get as much prep time on that as we wanted, so we did spend a bit of time refining the look as we went along. And Joe Bicknell from Company 3 made us a few sort of tasters and options to utilize, which began quite crunchy at the beginning, and we spent about 2 weeks refining that show look on set by sending him some samples. And he eventually tuned the shadow detail to give us a better spread of information. And what it meant is that detail was kind of rediscovered when the dailies were reprocessed. But again, we already knew that the detail was in there because we could see it on a scope. So even though we lost it in the LUT, version 2 of the LUT, by the time we reapplied version 3 of the LUT, we had, you know, we opened up all of that detail and we followed our rules. So we knew that what would work for stuff going forward would also work for stuff going backwards. And so it just allowed us to be more comfortable on set without having to bring in lights to overcompensate for a LUT, because we knew that it was there in the log, and everything was hunky-dory.
Yeah.
So, you know, just basically being able to rely on that equipment is half the job almost, you know, and being able to trust it is tantamount.
Yeah. So one of the things I've heard spoken from DITs, and that is that obviously having a leader on set, you know, said is that ultimate reference and measurement, but it's also the confidence that they know, having spoken to the post-production house, that they're also using leader products, probably 56 and 7600 for doing that editing, grading work, final QC for deliverable, that they just feel so much more comfortable that what they're seeing on set, they know is exactly what's being seen in post.
Yeah, absolutely. Maintaining consistency on set is key, but yeah, I mean, it's been a long time since I've been in post house, but when I was, there was tons of hardware scopes being utilized, and you know, everyone was constantly checking legal levels and how images were being output, and the knowledge that, you know, what you're seeing on set is what they're going to be seeing in the grade and the DI. That's reassuring. It means that if there are any issues, I'll flag them before them, you know.
Yeah.
and then that saves time and money, which is the key.
Yeah, because I've always, you know, tried to tell people that HDR is not about brighter pictures. It's about being able to get the detail that we weren't able to achieve in 709. It's to be able to get the detail in the blacks and then have what we normally rolled off in the knee of the camera, and to be able to expose that and have greater stop range, basically. and
more colors and better
yes.
saturation levels and yeah, it's a bigger palette of
So in our previous session, Dane had talked about that a lot of what happens in the US is driven by the studios, and sometimes getting some of the gear that's needed, they don't want to put the money out sometimes, even though it's an HDR shoot. And so because monitors, as you were talking about, can be quite a lift in what's needed, that it's kind of driven by the studios and he kind of hinted that he thought that it was a little different in Europe, that you had a little more control of what was needed for the shoot. Is that accurate in what he was talking about?
So when you put it like that, I would say it's there's always an element of negotiation, because your primary function, I guess, at the beginning of the shoot is to ascertain what is the goal. And then it's a question of, do you already have the gear, or do you need to go out and buy it? And is the gear that you've got good enough? Is it going to do the job to the best of, to the level that they need? Or do you need to go out and get something else? And in my case, I came by, I didn't have a HDR monitor, and I didn't want to, we're a rental house, so we were like, well, how can we benefit from this? So we went out and we bought the best one that we could, and we did end up getting it onto the job. But also to echo Dane, like, there is an element of it. I hate the idea of competing with the DP for budget, because it's not a fun concept, and you rarely win those things. So it was a situation where I had to have a conversation with them and be like, look, this is the situation. This monitor, or a monitor, this is going to cost us money. And I totally understand if that rules us out or whatever, but Kit was very keen to, I think what had happened previously was that they'd for Kit's last feature, they'd done a HDR pass without monitoring in HDR, and it had burnt them. They ended up throwing the pass away, and they didn't actually release it, I don't think. And ultimately, Netflix's guides dictate that a HDR pass is crucial. So Kit's response to that was, well, I need to monitor in HDR at all times. I need to have something that is going to give me an accurate representation of what a HDR scene is going to look like. And because it was one of the first productions in the UK to have that true HDR SDR combination, and because Kit was willing ultimately to sacrifice a portion of his lighting and camera budget to accommodate this, because I think, and I say that now, not 100% knowing if that was the way that it came about, because I was talking to you about Netflix originals maybe having a bit more control over the budget to shimmy things around. So maybe they did something there that I don't know. But ultimately, we said, look, HDR is going to cost more. What do you want to do about it? And they said, we'll accommodate Kit. And then we got into it. But too often HDR can be a bit of a late minute thing, and you're compromised because your budgets are set already. And then it's a question of, well, how do I do this with the money that you've got? And then, there are other options out there. I think ultimately, until productions become more aware of the benefits and the cost savings that can be passed on, to different stages, and to begin to factor them in when they're budgeting, it is a difficult one. And I'd love actually to hear from the US DITs about not so much how HDR came about, but how and why the studios decided to push it in the way that they did. Because, yeah, definitely it's a struggle getting people to commit to doing it properly. There've been quite a few shows that we've quoted on this year, and the GP wants HDR, but they can only afford HDR preview, or I'm still doing my tests with HDR preview, but from what I can tell, it seems to work to a degree. It really depends on what you want to prioritize when you're picking your monitors and when you're picking your what are you prioritizing? The pricing implication of HDR is definitely a prohibitive factor to a degree, but like 4K, I think that Dane said that his 12G upgrades cost him like, what was it, $65,000 or something, which is a lot of money. And then there's this debate of like, well, how do you pass that on to your customers? How do you remain competitive when you've spent $100,000 on your rig and people want to pay you peanuts for it? It's just it's a nightmare, guys, I tell you this. But hopefully I answered the question. I'm sorry, I do a lot of waffling.
That's great. We love it.
Because one of the things Dane did say, that if the budget's prohibitive, sort of look at the shooting schedule and sort of say, well, actually, okay, it's a 7-day shoot, but let's just get an HDR monitoring for one day.
That's a very good point.
Get the shooting. I mean, it's not going to allow you with the talent and locations and stuff like that, but let's try and get where I know HDR is going to have a real impact on the storyline. Let's monitor him for that day and let's do it.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I like that.
But you also feel now with the DOPs and stuff like that, because there is now a lot more HDR content that's visible, and they're seeing what their peers are doing, and they're looking at that going, oh, that looks quite nice. I've shot with that camera. I couldn't get it to look like that. How did you do it? Are we now leaning against an open door with this kind of HDR monitoring on set piece that, they don't want to sort of be the last one to the party?
I think a lot of people are keen to utilize it. It's just a question of, like you say, I guess leaning on an open door. It's coming, and consumer TVs are caught up almost. Like the new LG OLEDs are pretty phenomenal. I really like them, and they're affordable as long as you go for the C series rather than the G series. But stuff is there, and what's the point in having all of these great consumer monitors if you're not going to utilize them in an effective way? So it's coming, and like 4K monitoring on set. But I do resolutely believe that HDR has a bigger impact on an image than 4K. Absolutely. I mean, it's nice to have stuff in 4K, but for me, a HDR image that's been exposed correctly beats an SDR version of that in 4K.
Yeah, I've seen tests where somebody did a HDR against just raw 4K that was not HDR, and the HDR blew it out of the water.
Yeah, because it's more of a visual feast for your eyes. Your eyes want to be wowed. And perceiving resolution is not really that exciting, but perceiving more stops of dynamic range is to the brain more exciting.
Yeah.
or at least it is for me. And you guys.
You mentioned a little bit, about your waveform monitor on your cart, and what functions do you really like on your 5333?
So I don't have the 53. Yeah, I do have the 5333. I thought you said the 5350, which I was going to be like, I don't have that one yet. I want it.
Yeah. We'll work on that with you.
Yeah. So I didn't use, but now I do, thanks to Dane again, and a little prompt from you guys, the USB stills option that actually came into play the other day, where we were transferring some stuff over, and yeah, that, I mean, so like the still side of things is quite useful. The main things that I utilize though would be the RGB parade, vector scopes, and the cine zone function. Those are my three go-tos. And I've already sort of touched upon analyzing light is it's a lot easier when you've got separated RGB channels, because if you understand the principle that when they combine it's white, and when they don't combine there's a cast of some description. If you understand that principle, it really isn't that difficult to read them. It's just the accuracy that I have with a leader is not, nothing else really compares to it when you come to looking at the fine grain sort of way in which it's represented. And I'm a big advocate for false color, and I like to analyze my general luminance levels using CineZone, because it's a really easy way for me to check how our contrast ratios are doing, and is our B camera angle also blue on this side with a tiny hint of green just here, or is the green missing? So do I need to bring that up? It just gives me like a very easy way to analyze stuff. And like I said, I didn't use the still pool, but I love it now, like being able to overlay stuff and analyze stuff that way is really useful. I am very, like I said, I'm very jealous of his double diamond and the ability to, because on mine I'm flipping between SDI feeds, so I'll hit A and then I'll hit B, and I wait for them to switch, whereas he's got both of them side by side, and for me that's a big plus.
Yeah. Also, with the 5350, you can actually overlay two lives. So a lot of people love to put a vector scope on top of a vector scope and change the color of the display in each one, where you could pull two cameras in and literally flop them on top of each other.
Love it. I like that. And then you're really kicking there.
And you don't have to do it with stills. You can actually,
or you don't have to go A B.
Yeah. So, but yes, appreciate it a lot.
Because one of the other, obviously, you said about capturing stills to the USB memory stick. You can also capture the waveform and the vector, and we've had numerous people say that they would capture that and then share it with the second unit, saying, "Well, this, especially the description we have with HDR is you're shooting the interiors, but you can see the windows and you can see what it looks like outside." The crew doing outside have a clue. They need to be pretty close, because when it comes to the edit and you start cutting this together, if although you can't see it completely from the interiors, but HDR is allowing you to have a pretty good idea what it looks like outside. So when they do walk out that door,
I would go one step further and say that HDR allows you to not just have a pretty good idea, but it allows you to to present what is outside in a way that you're just not able to in SDR. With SDR, if you're lighting an interior scene and your exterior is a bright sunny day, but you've got your villain on the hiding behind a door, and you just want to see the very just one side of his face, you just need a little bit here, and then the rest of the exterior is blown out in SDR, or it's getting pretty close to that. HDR will allow you to sort of preserve that a lot more, which is that was one of my most favorite parts of On I Came By, when we sort of really, we could see how bad the SDR looked versus the HDR. And had we not had the HDR monitor there, we would have corrected for it. But we had it. We had it in the HDR, on the HDR monitor. I guess what I'm trying to say is your exterior will be present a lot more, and you won't have to correct for it. You won't have to light the interior of your scene up to then stop down to then preserve your highlights in your exterior, but you're having to spend more money lighting it on the interior. You're having to give more fill on the interior to sort of compensate for that. We didn't have to do that in this particular scene, because although the SDR didn't look great, we knew that using Dolby Vision and the way that they were going to grade it, they'd just be able to pull all of that information out of the HDR grade and stick it in the SDR grades. So it was like, saved us a bag of time.
Yeah.
Which is great, that's what we want.
Yeah. So, Cindy, I've noticed on the chat there's been lots of things rolling through.
So many things. You want to hear some questions? Where are you at?
Sure, there's some ones out there that our audience would like us to address. Do you want to?
Yes. So many good things. So here's one of the questions. How do you go about integrating with camera teams who are not really understanding what a DIT does, and who generally expect that you're there to just back up media? If the production doesn't really understand what a DIT's for, it can be difficult to integrate without treading on toes. So I guess a bit of a political question there before we dig into the tech questions.
So what was the question again? It was how do you
Yeah, they're asking sort of
with the camera team. How do you integrate with the camera team? Well, so like if you've been hired as a DIT, your responsibilities are not just to back up data. In fact, your responsibilities are not to back up data as a DIT. A data manager is whose responsibility it is to back up data. A DIT is there to support the camera team by checking all the settings, taking responsibility for making sure that there are no errors. I was going to swear, but I won't swear.
Yeah.
To make sure there's no F-ups in terms of, what the expectations and deliverables are. So typically, when I get hired on a job, I will immediately ask them a whole bunch of questions about the nature of the shoot, where are you shooting, all this kind of stuff, find out all of that. Then I will have a phone call with the DOP, and I'll make sure that everything that he wants to achieve, I can first and all provide. Is he doing anything out of the ordinary? Is he wanting to, do anything specific or utilize anything specific with his with his tools. When I get on set, I will fight tooth and nail to get as close to camera as possible. I will make sure that I always have an image from camera. If you don't do that, that's on you. Your responsibility as a DIT is to make sure that you are present and ready to go for the DOP. That's, of course, sometimes you're going to have instances where it might be a bit awkward or this or that. And that's, really that's part and parcel of the diplomatic requirement of being a DIT. You're always going to be arguing with people over something. That's part of the job. But what's crucial is that if they ask you something, you are able to provide them with a useful answer. If they're asking you your opinion on exposure, you have to make sure that it's correct. You have to make sure that it's a reasonable, considered, accurate opinion. If they ask you to take over iris, you have to make sure that you're up to the responsibility of exposing the image for the cinematographer. If you're matching cameras, you need to make sure they're matched. That's the responsibility of a DIT. You can't, if someone's hiring you as a data manager and expecting you to do this other stuff, then you need to politely explain to them that needs to be compensated, and they need to, you need to be sure that if they are compensating you for that financially, that you can do the job.
That sounds good. That makes total sense. I like it so much, Alix. We've had several questions about lookup tables, about LUTs. And so, as we know, movies use lookup tables with show looks on set, but how typical is it when shooting commercials? Is it to create a look beforehand? We had some other questions about using LUTs and just sort of generally asking you to speak to them.
How typical is it to go in? I would say that typically the look side of things on a feature and a TV show is a lot more in depth. If I'm creating a look on a commercial, there's no budget usually for prep days for DITs in the UK. I know the US DITs will probably be very upset to hear that, but and we're very upset to hear that. But it's rare for productions to say, sure, DIT, go for a prep day. We ask, and sometimes I get it, if there's a specific enough reason for them to accept. But generally, the expectation is that we'll turn up with a bag of looks, and we'll turn up with a bag of options. And if I've got a good relationship with the DP, I may already have made them certain, camera specific LUTs that they can apply. They may already have a USB stick with their own on. Certainly, I find the most enjoyable part of the job is the bit where I get to be creative, and that color side of things, whether it be live grading or whether it be taking an image and doing a really, really fine, post sort of quality grade on it with loads of, isolated secondaries and all this kind of stuff to create like the perfect still for the DOP to then take to the grade and be like, this is what it needs to look like. I love that. Do I get the opportunity to do that before the job in the UK on a commercial? No, very rarely do I get the chance to do that, but I would like to. But it's not. We're not there yet. We don't have a strong union. Well, we do have we do have Beck2, and I love Beck2, but a lot of the time DITs we're not on our own. There are hubs and communities out there, but it's not as tight a knit community as the US. Sadly, I wish it was.
A little bit of a follow-on to that one around LUTs. When you're shooting HDR, are all the on-set monitors HDR capable? And if not, do you create color transform LUTs and separate CDLs for SDR monitoring?
So the idea, so depends on the production. On I Came By, we had that discussion. Financially, it wasn't viable to have more than one HDR monitor on set. So the HDR monitor stayed with me. It was, Kevin, I've sent you the photos. It was massive. It sat on my car, and basically we just flipped between A and B. Are we heading towards a world where there will be more HDR monitors on set? Yes, we definitely are. When I do a HDR show, at the moment, it's budget dependent, but I will usually be the one with the HDR monitors. Everyone else will get a flavor of SDR, Rec 709 usually, and that's kind of it for the time being, unfortunately. But everyone's sort of prepped for that, and if they need to check stuff in HDR, then they're always welcome to.
And following up a little bit on that, talking about HDR and SDR, what about the dailies? Do HDR production dailies, are they uploaded to HDR, or do they need to be converted to SDR?
So I would love to be able to answer that properly, but I when we did the dailies for I Can Buy and Supacell and stuff like that, HDR dailies is not something that people have prioritized, which is a shame, because I think it is definitely possible, and I think it is worth doing. One of the best things that I got to play with but didn't implement on I Came By was the Dolby Vision plugin for Resolve, which took your HDR grade and interpolated it into an SDR framework. I don't see why that couldn't be implemented very easily. It's a little more, there's an element of time where you have to let the footage be analyzed. And if you are shooting a lot of footage, yes, it will take some time, but it gives you a better starting point for your of course there's a trim pass, and there's tweaks and stuff that you will do that the Dolby Vision sort of analysis will maybe need to be tweaked, but I was so impressed by that. I think that would be a very easy way to implement what's just been suggested. Otherwise you need to, it kind of takes away, by doing it that way, it takes away the need for production producers and people like that to have like a fully calibrated HDR monitor. You can send them an interpolated SDR version that they can look at on their iPad, and it will, look pretty damn close. But yeah, it depends on exactly what productions require and how they want to spend that money and time.
Yeah, a follow on to that question, and you've kind of gotten into it a little bit already. So when monitoring HDR on set, can some of the monitors still be 709? And this person's thinking about for showrunners, kind of what you were talking about, if the budget really isn't there for everybody to have an HDR monitor. If you have 709 monitors, would those monitors still get the same signal, or is there additional processing involved to support those 709 monitors?
Yeah, there is. So for each camera on I Came By, we had 2 LUT boxes. They would both receive the same log image, and then they would both receive the same CDL commands. They would both have the same LMT, and then they would have different output display transforms depending on what color space we were going to. So we basically had a Rec 709 LUT box for A camera, a Rec 2020 PQ LUT box for A camera, and then the same for B camera, and then the same for C camera when that came out. And then on my rig, I would have an A camera SDR monitor, an B camera SDR monitor, and then an A and B combined HDR monitor. And that was fun pushing upstairs. But yeah, ultimately, yes, you need to have more equipment to do that dual version. And for I Came By, it was made easier by the fact that we had an ACES workflow. Because then see you later, Johnny. Thank you. We had, it was made easier by an ACES workflow, because then everything was sort of contained and manipulated in the same way, and then all that changed was the display out transform.
So then we're an hour in. I bet that ACES got mentioned.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. Eventually, ACES CCT all the way. Yeah.
So, obviously, we've been asking you questions. Steve and I are here. Have you got any questions for us?
Questions for you in general?
Well, sort of. My question was that the double diamond I really like, but I haven't had a chance to properly utilize it. So I was just kind of I was curious how Dane sort of felt that was better than the RGB parade, and would you consider ever putting that out to the 5333? Or is it capable? Is it a question of it being capable?
Which is quite, unfortunately, the 5333, we cannot reverse engineer it and put it on. Steve will answer the much more simpler question now of why the diamond pattern, or as we call it, the extended gamut display, is so useful, because basically it's 2 tools in one, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah, it is. So the beautiful thing about it is it vectors green against red and vectors green against blue. So when you've got a shot that you know there's a white balance issue, but you're having problems telling where it is, it points it absolute to you. It'll tell you that your blue channel is running just a little bit hot, and you can pull it back in, because Mother Nature always puts white in everything we do. And so there's always this beautiful, perfect vertical line, and you'll see it tilt one way or the other way, or the blacks will pull up or the blacks will pull out. So it actually will tell you, okay, is it in the highlights or is it in the shadows that's off, and which channel it is and which way you need to go with that channel immediately, rather than getting in there going, whoop, whoop, no, whoop, whoop, yep, oh, there it is. It says, here's exact. where you need to be. And it's
Gotcha.
beautiful on, especially on stuff that you can't always chart and throw something out there, and you need to do it now, and it's just boop, there it is.
Right.
And you think about shooting outside. All you have to do is be shooting outside for a few hours, and the sun has moved, and everything has started to shift, and it just boop, okay, there it is, back perfect again.
Yeah, that's a really great example, actually, of where it would be super beneficial. That's kind of exactly what I had in mind when I was thinking about using it.
No, it's beautiful to be able to do that, and it's so quick. And
as we on the 5350, not only can you overlay the waveform and the vector scope, but also the diamond pattern. So if you've got two, you can lay them over the top of each other, and you can match them exactly. And a customizable layout, you can have the diamond, you can have the vector, you can have the waveform, and you can have your picture as a thumbnail as well. So, you've basically got the best of all worlds with that. So, I don't want to do a celebration on you, but it is really nice, isn't it?
Well, you are wearing leader on your shirt there.
And the other thing that I had was on CineZone, you can dial in your like top safety or your bottom safety. You can that you can set your black point to cut off at like 5% or whatever. Is there a way to dial something in the middle as well?
So have a play around with it. There's a tool called CineSearch, which you may have looked at, which basically allows you to set what your lower level is, what your upper level is, but also you can set a user-defined midpoint value. Now, what that will give you is plus or minus 0.5% either side. And then with the false color display, that will appear green on the screen. Then
is there a way to change that from plus or minus 0.5% to like 4%?
Correct if I'm wrong, Steve, but I don't think you can. It was basically designed so that you can set pretty accurately a level.
Yeah.
And obviously people do that for 18% middle grey. They set that bump. And then they set their limits. So also at the other end of the scale, anything that's below your lower threshold will appear blue, and everything that's above your upper threshold appears red. So if you're working with
okay.
There might be a video on a YouTube channel on this one. If not, I should put one up. But it's certainly a lot of people who found it, because that's unfortunately how they get hold of this. They found it, they've stumbled across it. Once you've used it, you won't ever go back from it, just for doing that quick setup. I've got my lower limit, I've got my upper limit, bang, there's my 80% middle grey, I'm off.
Yeah.
Right, I'm gonna call you about that later.
Yeah, you could imagine, like you were talking about, A camera, B camera, and being able to make sure that the grays are exactly the same on the two. And, the lighting is straight.
There's been a couple questions that seem to tie into what you're talking about. Folks are asking about CineZone versus the EL zone, the Ed Lockman zone. And do you want to speak to that at all, or?
Well, obviously CineZone, and jump in when I get this wrong, Steve, is obviously we're using a false color display based on the IRE values.
Yeah.
Whereas I believe
709.
709. Whereas I believe the other system is basically using it based on f-stops. So I believe grey is your 18% middle grey, and then it goes off in increments of half an f-stop up and down. So
so in 2020 or 709, it's still going to be based on the gamma that you are set at. And where the other display you were talking about is a log 2 power display, which mimics f-stops. So you're going to get the f-stop movement, and the linearity of the two are different. Kevin and I have had several conversations with our design team trying to see what we can do. but it's like anything else. It's where does it fit on the tote board for features that would like to be implemented, have to be implemented, nice to have. What's the, from a business perspective, what's the ROI for,
Yeah. But Steve,
people have to watch a spreadsheet.
Yeah. One of the things you can do, and it's available on the 5330, 5333, and the Zen series, there is Cinelight, which is the built-in light meter tool. So that allows you to position a crosshair on the screen, and you can measure that pixel's value in luminance, in RGB, code value, and if you have the HDR license, it will do that as well. But then there is also, if you go through the menu, there's an f-stop setting for that. And what that allows you to do is you can put a cursor on a part of the picture, set that as a reference, and then position the other two cursors, and it will give you the difference from that reference to the cursor position in f-stops. So you could set your 18Z reference, mark it, then go to your highlights and go into your blacks, and then you could see what the f-stop difference is. And on that, you can also adjust your gamma as well. There's a setting in there that you can change the gamma. And for those of you familiar with the LV5330 and LV5333, the Leader Zen series with software release version 6.7 now supports CineZone and CineLight being displayed simultaneously. There's also a tool called CineLight Advanced, which allows you to take that pixel you've identified in the picture and display it on the waveform trace and also the vector scope display. So thus giving you extremely accurate measurement of that pixel. If anybody's out there, you've got a Leader Zen series, or you've got 5333 or 5330, go into CineLight, select f-stop, and go and have a play. There is a lot of stuff in there. If you've not explored it, it's quite fascinating.
Is that available on the 5350 as well?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, cool. All right. It's good to know.
Yep. So if you're looking at pictures in f-stops, it's a very simple and easy tool for you to pick the point on your picture, set that as your reference, and then you can go off and measure your dynamic range.
Awesome.
Brilliant. Well, we've sort of run over the hour again, which...
Yes, we have. But it's been great, Alex. We really appreciate it. I love these, especially being able to just have an open forum, open chat, and be able to respond to what people are asking, and hopefully gave them some great tips and hints.
Hopefully. I really appreciate you having me on, and yeah, it's been really fun. So thank you very much to you guys as well, and to everyone.
And for obviously everybody else out there, for all of those of you who have gone through the 70 minutes with us, or even longer if you joined the tech check at the beginning, a copy of this recording will be up on our YouTube channels. And as we mentioned, for any of you who are heading to Las Vegas for NAB in April, Steve and I will be there. We might even post a couple of videos during the build of the show just to tease you what we're up to. So if you're coming over, please come and say hello, because we really appreciate your feedback. We like doing these events, and if there's any subject matter that you feel could potentially be used, drop us a line. We'll explore it, and even bring in people who know a lot more about it than us.
Absolutely. So everybody, thank you very much, and have a great evening, morning, the rest of your day. And thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you once again, Alex.
Take care.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
If you've not already done so, we have an on-set production guide that's available to be downloaded. Simply point your camera at the QR code register your details, and you'll receive an email about how to download the guide.